Let's go to our panel in Denmark. In Copenhagen is lawyer Tarek Ziad Hussein, who wrote The Black Beard about being a Danish Muslim. Also in Copenhagen is journalist Tom Carstensen, and Susi Meret is an associate professor in the Department of Culture and Global Studies at Aalborg University. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Tarek, let me start with you. Did the centre-left win because they chose an anti-immigration platform?
I think that's a great question. In Denmark, we have since the year of 2001 had a very harsh discussion regarding Muslims and immigration and integration in general. And for most of us, we thought that there was no limits for the things that you could say and the things that the politicians could propose. But one of the new dynamics of this election was the party of Stram Kurs with Rasmus Paludan, as some of you may have seen on YouTube, who has gotten famous for burning the Quran in some of the areas where there's a lot of immigrants. And suddenly, for the first time, I think in 20 years, we had most of the political parties in Denmark defending the rights of Muslims and their right to have their religion in peace, but at the same time without giving up the right to criticize some of the issues that there definitely is within the Muslim community. So I think it's too easy to say that this was the only reason that the left-wing parties won the election, but it's definitely one of the reasons.
Okay, Susi, let me ask it to you in a different way. So you have the far-right parties saying Muslims are bad, Islam is evil, immigrants are going to harm you, and so on. That doesn't resonate with the majority of Danish people. But the centre-left's argument is you might lose your welfare benefits and you might lose the lifestyle that you have, and we've already seen austerity, if we allow in more immigrants. So they're not saying anything overtly negative about Muslims or other immigrants, but that seems to have done the trick. Is that an accurate characterization by me of the messaging from the centre-left?
Partly, I would say, in the sense that it helped to combine welfare issues, which are, of course, important, and particularly when these welfare issues are so let's say, translated into welfare nationalistic, welfare chauvinist, issues in the sense of creating this relationship in between welfare state and immigration. But there's no doubt actually that since at least 2015, the Social Democrats have significantly changed their own politics as concerns both immigration broadly understood and also asylum politics. So they have moved from a position that could be described as integrational in the sense of giving more emphasis on the integration of both migrants and refugees towards a position of sending people back, particularly as regards the asylum seekers and refugees that have come to the country lately.
Okay, so Tom, addressing the issue of welfare through the prism of immigration, was that the magic formula for the centre-left?
Well, the Social Democrats didn't, in fact, get more votes than last time. They got about the same, a bit less, actually. So, I mean, the Social Democrats have moved. They have the new generation of politicians, basically. The old ones called the Danish People's Party, which was the first big right-wing party in Denmark. They called them very right-wing. They said they would never be a proper party. This new generation, they're a lot younger. They have changed. They've changed the party in general. They are saying things that the Danish People's Party said 10 years ago. You can't really, if you look at old quotes from Danish People's Party from then and young Social Democrats now, it's hard to tell the difference.
Right. So do you believe that they've been dragged to the right? And if so, by what?
So you could say they've been dragged to the right. You could say they have changed their mind because there are issues in Denmark that needs resolving. That's what they would say themselves. I mean, the integration spokesperson, his father was from Somalia, as far as I remember, and he lives in one of the areas where there are many people from Muslim countries, and he has these feelings, even though he's half immigrant. So
right.
You have to ask themselves why they did it.
Okay, so Tarek, this is interesting, right? So you have somebody who is originally from Somalia pushing for an anti-immigrant platform. According to the best available evidence that I have, more immigrants voted than ever before in this election. So you have all of that, and they're voting for less immigration. It's democracy. That's what they want. Tell me your thoughts on that.
So that's actually very interesting because, as we've seen in Denmark for the last many elections, the amount of people who vote in immigrant areas are much lower than amongst Danish citizens. So in this election, we've seen what I've called almost a revolution when we see how people have mobilized in these areas to make sure that some of the most extreme right-wing parties don't get into parliament. But just to give you an example of how harsh the tone regarding Muslims in Denmark is, one of the biggest newspapers today in Denmark called Jyllands-Posten, they had a front page where they problematized that many more Muslims were voting for this election and that the imams in the mosque were going out and saying to people, remember to vote, and of course saying, remember to vote on the parties that wants to ensure that your freedoms and your rights will be maintained and secured here in Denmark. So it's amazing how such a positive story, you would think, could be laid out as being something horrible that the Danish people should be afraid of. So many Muslims feel that they are in some kind of catch-22 situation, because when we don't vote, we are told that we don't engage in democracy, and on the other hand, when we go out and vote, we are told that that's also a problem, which is a great example of how the debate regarding Muslims have been in Denmark since 2001.
Susi, is there a harsh tone?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, we've been conducting interviews with politicians at different levels, both at national level and local level. And we have observed that particularly when it comes to Muslim minorities, the Muslim community, the tone and particularly the discourse is harsh, but not only amongst so-called radical right populists or right-wing populists, but also amongst other, let's say, more mainstream parties. So there's certainly something to discuss about, something that needs to be also bring to dialogue. And particularly, I think that the Muslim communities are unheard as concerns several different things, which is not only, let's say, the tone of the debate when it comes to migration and asylum issues, but also when it comes to, for example, deciding where to displace people as regards to urban planning, the so-called ghetto plan that has been so implemented recently in different major Danish cities. So I think that, and hopefully, so the new government will take this issue up, also discussing aspects that relate to Islamophobic positions. Yes.
And on the fringes, Tom Carstensen, so the far-right DPP, the Danish People's Party, from more than 20% to less than 10% now of support. The anti-Islam party, Hardline, didn't even get the 2% threshold. What does that tell us about the Danish people's feelings towards those on the edges of the right-wing spectrum?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to differentiate here, because I don't see Danish People's Party as a far-right party, not with the parties I work with. They are, in many ways, a social democratic party with a very staunch, very hard, you could call, immigration policy. They are very close to the Danish Social Democrats now on a lot of policies. It's just very important for me to differentiate. Far-right is, to me, something else. That would be Stram Kurs, for instance. He's far right. He didn't get in. No, he lost by 0.2, I think. And speaking of the tone, of course, he's extreme in his way of saying things and his things he does, and pretty much anybody else completely distanced themselves to him. You also have another party called Nye Borgerlige that came in. They're libertarian and on most policies, and then they are hard right on immigration. They just got in above the threshold. So Danish People's Party have been slaughtered in this election, of course, but I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Social Democrats have taken over so many policies that they have basically, it's been such a big success so that it's a problem for themselves.
Yeah, just one small point regarding the Danish People's Party, because one of the other big reasons I think that they lost this election is that they got famous for being an anti-establishment party. And for the last 4 years, they have shown that they have become a part of the establishment and therefore lost a lot of votes to the other parties.
Got it, got it. And so when we look at the Liberals, as they do their soul-searching, when Lars Løkke Rasmussen and the Liberals try to figure out where they went wrong, if you had to identify one thing, Tarek, what would that be?
I think that's my personal analysis, that one of the things that we lack in the Danish political system is and probably it's a problem all over the world, that there's a lack of ideology. And in Denmark, the differences between the Social Democrats and the Liberals, who are the two main parties that deliver all the governments, they are very, very small. And at the end of the day, if you put them together, they would probably agree on almost everything. That's also why Lars Løkke Rasmussen, at the end of the election cycle, tried to propose that to engage in a government with the Social Democrats, which is a great symbol of how small the differences actually are at the end of the day.
Susi Meret, as we look across the continent, would others across the continent be looking at the Danish example and try copycat approaches? Because they're looking at populism, they're looking at the right wing. It's either those on the fringes of the right or the Greens and those on the fringes of the left that seem to be doing well. The center seems to be hollowed out. But the center left comes out in Denmark and wins, and it says some of the things that the working class generally resonates with, that usually goes towards the right. They got those votes. Would others be looking at Denmark and say, maybe we can follow this narrative as well?
Well, of course, there's a lot of interest, and already, I mean, now also before the elections, Social Democrats from Germany were in contact with also several academics who have been studying this field of politics for a long time. And I think that the interest is precisely as to what Tarek was mentioning, in the sense of the ideology that is a little bit like dissolved or disappearing, both on the center left and on the center right. Because, I mean, co-opting politics from other parties, of course, dilutes very much what were some kind of ideological pinpoints of the party. And this is what, let's say, is a consequence of getting towards the middle and trying to win and maximize votes towards the middle, which might be very problematic. And I would say not only for the Social Democrats in a way, but also in this case for the Danish People's Party, which is a party that obviously during these elections has lost a little bit of the issue, so importance that was predominantly the migration and the asylum issue. So it's very interesting to see, let's say, the next steps, not only the government formation from the side of the Social Democrats, but also the reactions from the Danish People's Party.
Okay, Tarek, so very finally from you, because we're running out of time. Just one second, Tarek, fold in your response to this, right? If this is going to be a winning formula across the continent, right, where those in the center, whether center right or center left, decide, hey, we can be maybe more anti-immigrant in order to come to power because they failed over the past few years. Yeah. What is this going to mean for immigration across the continent? Tarek?
Again, that's a great question, because Denmark was probably one of the first European countries that had a very harsh line regarding immigration back in 2001. And therefore, it's interesting to see if the way that this election has been laid out will also be projected over at other countries in Europe. I think that the Social Democrats' logic was that we will be very harsh on integration, and in that way we will secure the votes from the Danish People's Party. And on the other hand, that means that we will lose some of the leftist votes in our own parties, but those votes will go to the leftist parties that will support us anyway. And therefore you could say in many ways that the logic and the plan of the Social Democrats has been a great success if you compare their amount of votes that they got in this election compared with Social Democrats all over Europe.
Tarek, Ziad, Hussein, Tom, Carstensen and Susi Meret, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers.